Welcome to the We Hack Purple podcast, where each episode we meet a new member of the information security industry and we learn cool new stuff from them. This season is season 3, which is about application security in general. And I've just been asking people to tell me basically, we've just been talking about topics that interest us or that we're currently kind of fascinated with and toying around with. And I am Tanya Janka, your host, also known as She Hacks Purple, and this episode is sponsored by Day of Security. It is an annual event which advocates for inclusion and diversification of gender in cybersecurity, and it's really soon. It is May 18th and 19th. So it is coming up, and May 18th is virtual, so you can attend from anywhere in the world, and tickets are free. So I strongly suggest you check it out. I'll tell you a little more later in the episode, but you're probably like, come on, Tanya, just tell us who your guest is. And my guest is Enno. Welcome, Enno.
Hi, yeah, I'm Enno. I'm currently working at SemGrep as a security researcher. Um, yeah, and um, I told Tanya that the topic that I want to talk about here is like static analysis, which like obviously, yeah. So I think I have probably some neat things to say about it, hopefully. So.
Yeah, for sure. Would you mind telling our audience what a security researcher is? Because we
Yeah.
actually, of all the different types of jobs, I don't think we've ever had one on before.
Oh, yeah. It's unfortunately it's like a very, very broad term, I feel. Like the way that it's in the various contexts that it's used in this industry. Um but for SemGrep it's basically like we aren't really doing like novel research, but more so just research to actually, so if you don't know how SemGrep works, it's a SAST code scanner tool. And SemGrep itself is just an engine, and then you write rules that tell it like what to look for, basically. And so the rules that we write would be like saying like, hey, this is what SQL injection looks like for Flask or something. And yeah, so basically we're doing kind of research just like basically just trying to find every single way that any vulnerability in any framework or language could happen, and just putting the kind of research results into a SemGrep rule, um, yeah, so that
Cool.
people can use it.
Cool. That's actually really interesting. I'm sure that it's not the same as like inventing a new, like completely new novel idea of whatever, but I mean, this is like important work in my
Mhm.
opinion, because I want to know what SQL injection looks like so I can find it and squash it. So this is good.
Yeah.
Okay, so for our listeners who might, so a lot of our listeners have been doing AppSec forever, but we have some people that are quite new. Would you mind explaining kind of like what is stack analysis? Like how is it different from dynamic analysis?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so yeah, there's like two different types of analyses, right? Static and dynamic. And well, there's more, but yeah, like for like I guess AppSec stuff, those are the main two, right? And so static analysis is basically just like using the what you know from the source code um to like infer properties about a program, basically. Whereas dynamic analysis is like actually running the program and trying out like different inputs and stuff like that, seeing how it reacts, and basically you can kind of map out its behavior based on that, and therefore also infer some properties based on it. But yeah, so like static analysis is generally like the more information that a language provides the tool, the like better the outcomes will be, right? So for a language like Rust, where it's like it has like a very robust type system, and like just like types are baked into the code, right? Or can be like very easily inferred. Um, your like analysis will typically be better than like a language like Python, which doesn't have any types in the code anywhere, and so you kind of just have to be like, oh yeah, this is a request because it's called REQ because it's called rec or something, and
You're
you can't
like, I
really
hope
verify
this is
that.
so. Is it way harder to do stack analysis on a language where, how do I word this nicely? It allows for poetic license. Like I remember when languages came out where it's like you don't have to tell what type of variable it is. I'm like, well, of course I do. How will it know? And like it'll be inferred. I'm like, that sounds terrible. Ambiguity's awful.
Hmm.
Um, is that more difficult for a static analysis engine?
Uh, are you asking about just like the absence of types or having types be like inferred?
Have it
Or
like the absence of types or having types be inferred rather than declared? Like, is that
oh,
hard?
um, yeah. Well, for I guess like I haven't written any like uh checks or rules or whatever you want to call them in other for other SAST engines, but for SemGrep at least, one of the features that I probably use the most in it is called a typed metavariable, where basically, so in SemGrep there's a concept of a metavariable which it can just match like something, right? So like one of something. So it can be a function call, a variable name, a function argument, whatever. Because it can match one of anything,
Yeah.
you usually want to restrict it in various ways. You can like kind of apply regex to like the thing that it captures. You can also restrict it based on types. So you can tell it, I want it to only match this type or this set of types. And then that can make your like rules much more accurate, much
Nice.
less false positive heavy. Yeah,
Oh, that's
because
cool.
otherwise all you have to go off of is like the name, which can be different across many code bases for the same thing, and you're not going to get all of them.
Actually, let's back up. So, how do we even come up with rules for a static analysis engine? Like, how do we know what to look for or what is important to search for?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your goals, right? For like, right, I know for SemGraph we have a lot of rules that are like not security related, but more so just best practice or, um, I guess like
Quality?
finding anti-patterns, yeah, stuff like that. Also like sanity checks or whatever. Like, we have a rule that's like it flags when you compare like a variable against itself, right? Like a equals a or something,
And
right?
you're like, why are you doing that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was gonna say for security stuff, but I think this applies to just anything in general, right? Like, if you know, like you kind of have to know like what you want to look for, right?
Okay.
For my job, it would be like, oh, I want to look for again SQL injection in Flask, right? And then I can like do some like research on the internet about like past like stuff to a SQL library call from a Flask like request or something, right? All the ways that people do that, and then all the ways that that can go wrong. But definitely you should have like an idea of what you want to look for first, and the more specific, the better, because then the better you can like write your rule to make it more accurate.
Would it make sense to maybe look up some of the OWASP top 10 types of vulnerabilities
Mhm.
and look for those?
For writing a like a check, going purely off of OWASP is probably not the best, because OWASP categories are just very broad, right?
Yeah.
It's like right, like was it A1 or A3 2017 is like injection, and it's like all kinds of injection, of which there are many. And so we like for SemGrep, we do categorize our rules using OWASP, but we also probably rely more heavily on CWEs, which are much more specific, where it's like command injection or SQL injection, and then there could be multiple CWEs for SQL injection, and it's like each one is like slightly different, and so they're just much less broad. Yeah.
Can you explain? So this is funny because I was literally just on a call with the client talking about this for an hour. What a CVE is and what it stands for, and I can do that if you want, but and a CWE and why it's different and why
Oh
we want
yeah,
to look for one over the other.
yeah. I kind of think of a like CVE as like a specific instance of a CWE. So a CWE kind of describes a like problem, and just the problem itself, and not necessarily ways that it could like happen in a piece of code. CWE, SQL injection, right? And then but so a CVE is kind of a like very specific instance of that, like of a SQL injection in
Yeah.
a given code base on a certain date, and just assign like a number and stuff like that. So it's like a unique identifier and stuff.
To make sure that I totally get it and my audience
Mhm.
gets it, can I explain it back to you and tell me if I
Yes.
got it right?
Yes.
Okay, so CVE, Common Vulnerability Enumerator, for me, the way it's like you said, it's a specific instance. So in this version of SharePoint, if you don't have this service pack or this patch, then this vulnerability is for sure present. And
Mhm.
or like we both, like let's say both you and I have an ancient server that's running Windows Server 2008 R2, and we both have the same patches, we both theoretically would have the same potential vulnerabilities because it's a perfect copy. Like the Windows operating system, if you have the same version, then we both have the exact same thing
Yeah.
versus CWE is like a pattern, like a wider range of problem where you could create a calendar app and I could also create a different calendar app. And maybe we're not even using the same language or framework or whatever, but our calendars are still both super helpful and nice. But you would have it's a completely different program and
Mhm.
therefore could have completely different vulnerabilities in it. And so you might have, I don't know, injection, and I might have, oh, my security header is missing and made other mistakes or not follow best practices.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so a CWE, we have to use that on custom software because it's custom and each one's a snowflake. And so we have to look for broader patterns of what we know is wrong versus you have Windows 2000 Server R2 with this service pack and you have these three problems. Does that make
Yes.
sense?
Yes. 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 Yeah. I think it's like, um, for my job at least, it like you pointed out like it being tied to like version numbers and stuff like that. That's like incredibly important. Yeah. Um, because like you could have the same like you could have a command injection in two different versions of the same library, but then those would be different CVEs.
Exactly, because it's very specific. It's exactly here. And if
Yes.
you don't have that version, you don't have to worry about that one problem. But then, and then we have CWE's common weakness enumerators
Hmm.
because we want to. So, you and I, and all the other people probably listening to this podcast who are interested in securing apps, like we want to check to make sure none of these well known bad patterns are in our code. So a thing you and I were talking about before we started recording was like important considerations when writing rules. So what would be some of those? Because I have only written, so like disclaimer folks, I've only written some grep rules when DevSlop had Clint on and we wrote rules together. And every other time I've just watched other people look like smart ninjas doing it. So
Hmm.
please, please fill us in.
Yeah. I will also have a disclaimer. I've only written rules that are meant to be run on any code base, and
Nice.
therefore I have to consider a much wider variety of things and also restrict things a lot to make them as specific as possible so that there are less false
False positives.
positives. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's good though. So I feel
Oh,
like if
yes,
you're
yes.
going to tell us come sit, because like let's say I do AppSec and there's, five dev teams and they have like 20 or 30 apps, I would love to write a rule that I could apply to all of them instead of
Mhm.
just one. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think generally, like a check is kind of language and or framework specific. Just that inherently restricts, I guess, the widespread use of of a single rule. And so generally, you would write like instead of writing one SQL injection rule for to find everything, right? You would write like a SQL injection rule for a specific framework or a specific like language or whatever, and then kind of have to write another one if you want to write one for a different one. But so the reason that I brought up like I guess writing rules for a much more general audience is because I feel like most people that are using a tool like SumGrep would be writing rules for their company where they have their own code styles and stuff like that. And therefore you don't have to consider every single possibility. You kind of can just consider like restrict the scope down to like what your code style allows, and then also write checks to enforce that code style. So then that code style check would help your vulnerability check.
so you look for things that you know are not allowed
Mhm.
at your organization,
Yes.
not only things that are widely known as a problem, but it's like at our organization we don't do blah. Then you
Yes.
can
Yes.
go
Exactly.
search. Okay,
Yes.
that's cool.
Yeah.
What
So
other,
you can definitely do both, but I only do one of those too.
so what other types of considerations should we have when we're going to write a rule?
Yeah, definitely. As I mentioned earlier, I think like types are incredibly helpful. Whenever I write a rule for a language without like types in the code, I'm very sad because it makes my job so much harder. And also that rule will just probably inherently uh, have more false positives. I think to answer your question, I think it's kind of important to think about how a SaaS tool fits into like a developer's workflow, right? Because people generally split up SaaS into like SaaS 1.0 and SaaS 2.0, where SaaS 1.0 ran like very slow and like required like buildable code and stuff like that, right? It would like hook into your compiler or like instrument your binaries or whatever. Actually, maybe not the last one, but yeah. Anyways, SaaS 2.0 is like kind of meant to fit a lot better into like developers' pipelines and kind of just fit into their workflows, right? Because ultimately, as a security person, you are writing checks to kind of place restrictions on your developers, but if they get annoyed by the checks that you're writing, which is why
Mhm.
we try so hard to filter out false positives, because that is like the number one annoyance for a developer, where it's like this tool says I'm wrong, but I know I'm right. I can prove it. And it's
Yeah.
like what are they to do, right? They just have to deal with it. So uh yeah, basically as like as developers shift more towards like agile workflows, we have to kind of fit into that. Basically just try to make your rules like find what they need to without being overly restrictive. Um, and so you can use things like, your company's like style guide and like documentation for sure, like because they would have the types that a like maybe a function call takes in and also returns, and you can kind of write your rule based on that, right? Just to make it very specific and very accurate. I think also if you're writing rules for a language that you don't really know that well,
Mhm.
it's important to look at the ways that I guess like language behaviors can happen, right? Such as like um I'm writing rules for a language that I haven't really worked with very much for my current project at SemGrep. And I've had to look up like all the different ways that you can access something from an array in that language, right? And
Yeah.
this language specifically has many different ways to do that. It has like multiple functions to do that. It has like you can use like the like square bracket operator, stuff like that, right? And so basically when you're writing a rule, you're kind of encoding a set of behaviors that you want to flag, and also potentially behaviors that would act as preconditions or postconditions for that vulnerable behavior, right? So for example, for a rule that I'm writing, the like vulnerable like pattern is only actually vulnerable if it's like I believe accessed from an array, which is like why I brought that up. And so that kind of acts as a postcondition where like you need to know all the ways that you can access an array in that language so that you can make that postcondition accurate.
Okay, so
Uh,
like if the pattern looks like this and it's accessed from an array in one of these ways, then you want to report the thing.
yes,
So you can,
yes.
so you can have more than one condition
Mhm.
for a rule.
Yes.
Oh, that's nice. That's cool. Do you, so like a thing that we talked about before. So sometimes the audience is like, I feel like you had a better conversation before you start recording because I say that a lot, but we try to figure out what we want to talk about.
Mhm.
So, like a thing that I've seen a problem with at lots of companies is they'll implement a tool, like the security team will implement a tool, like a SAST or DAST or whatever, and they'll shove it into their CI/CD and they didn't test it first. And so, if we're going to write custom static rules, shouldn't or custom stack analysis rules, like shouldn't we test that first? Would that make sense? Or and how would we test that? Like, what would we do?
Yeah, you definitely should test it. What we do, because again, our rules are meant to be run across any code base, is we have a basically a like GitHub crawler thing, so we can basically just tell it like, hey, download 5,000 repos that fit the search query. And then we run a single rule across all those repos, and uh basically we like see like, oh, is this rule too noisy? Is it missing things that it should be finding?
Mhm.
And we can also like examine the actual code and see like, oh, maybe it's this is kind of like not how we want the rule to work. and yeah, just fix it based on that. Of course,
Mhm.
building a GitHub crawler thing could be a big task. So hmm,
But
I
maybe
think
you'd run it across like the first project you're working on and then maybe two or three other projects
yeah,
using
yeah,
the
yeah,
language
yeah,
and framework to
yeah.
see, does this blow up in my face? No? Okay, that's pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. I think like as an alternative to scanning every repo on GitHub, you could scan like the repos in your organization, right? That like are for the language or that use the language and or framework that your rule is for. Um, and like see how it performs based on that. Like you'd have to like look at the like number of findings for from a rule within like per repo basically, and also examine like the code that it matches and see like hey, like this is not how we want the rule to work. Maybe it's like missing a check for this pattern or whatever. You can automate the like tests, the like running the rule itself, but it's definitely better if you like examine the results and like as like a sanity check manually.
Okay, so let's say I got the open source version of SemGrep
Mhm.
and I'm like, I'm on an AppSec team somewhere. I'm like, I don't have like budget to buy a SaaS yet. I want to show return on investment. I want to show I'm gonna find stuff. This like we should do this because sometimes like when I'm working places, they already definitely are on board with security, but sometimes they're not, and they're just like, don't
Mhm.
waste my time, Tanya. And
Yeah.
so, let's say I wanted to start writing some grep rules. How would I start doing that? So like I haven't used SAST really much before. I ran the basic scan. I found some stuff, but I'm like, there's stuff I knows here that I want to find.
Mhm.
How would I get started writing a rule?
Two things you could do either separately or maybe together. Probably together is better. So you could definitely like just like ask like the team or like the shareholder or whoever like what kinds of things they would want to find, like basically just any way that you can narrow down the scope of what you want to look for
Okay.
would be great, because again SAST checks are best when they're very specific. And so if you can kind of enforce a more specific context for when you're writing the rule, then you'll just write a better rule.
Like, what if I had a pen test done and they found lots of stuff and it was very bad? Could I take some of those results? Because those devs
Mhm.
wrote lots of other apps at the
Oh
same
yes,
place,
yes, yes,
probably, right?
yes,
So then I
yes.
could take, can I take those results? Is there like a way where, I don't know, I could look at the code or something and then be like, maybe I can make a rule out of this somehow?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, you could definitely like compare it against like previous pen tests and maybe other like SAST checks that you've or SAST applications that you've like that you might be like comparing a given one against and seeing like SAST A is missing I don't know, some vulnerability that SAST B finds, then you know like, hey, this is a deficiency in the in either SAST A itself or the rule that it's running, um for the rule set. And based on that you can either edit the rule or add a new rule for that vulnerability.
I don't know if you have experience in this since like you do
Mhm.
security research and I previously did AppSec, but I found like whenever we would have a pen test done, I'd find that same problem, like the whatever, let's say they reported 20 things, I'd find at least five of those things in many, many other apps or
Yeah.
on many servers where there's like, we made the same mistake like over and over and over
Mhm.
again. Do you think so? This, I feel like this is a win, but help me because like you do this all the time. Like, would that be would we be able to make like a rule not only to look through what we have, but like to stop from then on, like to stop someone from making that problem again after we've run the rule one time? Like, could we do like a, I don't know if it's like a pre-commit hook or like just like
Yeah,
you
yeah.
check in your code and it's like, hey, we stopped doing that 6 months ago when we had that pen test. What,
Mhm.
can you have like a message that's like, come see Tanya, you've been bad? Maybe something better
You
than
broke the
that.
rules, you're in trouble. Yes,
No cookie
yes.
for you.
Yes, yeah, so as I was talking about earlier, like okay, well actually, so I'll answer the first question first. Yeah, so definitely you can and probably should within your organization, right? If there's like previous things that are deemed bad and you don't have checks for them, then yeah, you should probably write checks for them. As I was talking about earlier, like with like the kind of like agile workflow, right? And how SaaS now has to fit into that. There's like a notion in like the security industry, like shift left, right? Like shift the security part more towards the beginning of the like like software development lifecycle, so that you can catch issues before they become an actual issue, right? And also you can like putting it earlier kind of encourages a much more like active conversation about any particular issue, right? For example, an issue that your SAST check finds, right? It encourages a much more like ongoing real-time kind of conversation. I don't know, you could put that like finding into like a Jira ticket or something, right? And then like track that, right? And so because SAST now fits into like like things like pre-commit and also like other like CI/CD things, right? Which would be run on like PRs before they get merged or new commits in a branch and not on master, right? You can find and like get rid of these issues before they're pushed to production.
Can you put like a custom message though that says like so let's say there's like coding style.
Mhm.
Maybe I could have a message that said like, this is against the coding style of this org. And it's not like we're going to block you from going to prod or anything because
Yeah.
you're not using camel case or whatever. But like it's like, hey, like you've been told, like there's a warning, like do better next time, versus like I want like, no, you should panic, you gotta fix this, don't push this code anywhere.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah. Yeah, so for SumGrep, and I'm pretty sure other other modern SaaS tools, you can like write a custom message for every rule. We actually like did are kind of having an issue with this where it's like because the messages are like per rule, it's hard to enforce consistency between them, right? And so that's one thing to keep in mind. If you're writing a rule for like especially like bigger org, right? You would want consistency between all your like SQL injection messages because otherwise it's really confusing for a developer who's seeing it and doesn't know what SQL injection is, right? Yeah, so like generally our messages have like, hey, we found this vulnerability. We even have like the ability to put like stuff that the rule captures into the message itself. So we
okay.
can put like variable names and function names and stuff like that within the message. And so we can be like, hey, we found I don't know, SQL injection originating from this request variable to this SQL function library call. And like, here's a brief or not paragraph. Here's a brief like sentence about like why it's bad, and here's another brief sentence about what you can do to fix it. Like if you want to enforce like sanitizers or whatever in your company, then you can say like use this sanitizer, or if you just want to avoid the problem altogether, you're going to say like just don't do that, right? You can just like write whatever you want. But yeah, definitely, it is important to keep in mind like the stuff like consistency, especially across a bigger org.
So this was a thing again that I wanted to bring up in the podcast was like, so you and I were talking about this. So this is sort of content creation. So at We Hack Purple, I make
Mhm.
courses and videos and all of this stuff. I write blog posts and stuff. And there's like this fine line where you're trying to teach something to someone and they're a professional and they kick ass at their job and you kick ass at your job, and you want to explain how they did something wrong in a way where you're being respectful. Like you don't want to talk down to them like they're dumb or anything like that, but it's like, I found a problem, like this is the problem, this is why the problem is scary, but you want to also like explain it in a way where it's not just going whoosh, like right over their
Yeah.
head as well. And so like how do we try to do that? Like how can we like walk that line of like being informative but not being pedantic at every turn? Do you know what I mean?
I think definitely, especially in like SaaS messages, where like you don't want a comment on a PR to take up a whole page or something, right? Like you could include all that information about like this is command injection, this is why it's bad, this is all the ways that can happen in I don't know, this code base or whatever. Generally we just yeah, we just try to have the like very important stuff like vulnerability found, what kind it is, the impact, how to fix or like remediate the issue. I think definitely like it'd be nice if you're like rolling out SaaS within your org to just like talk to your developers and like maybe you could write out like a few sample like rule message styles or templates or whatever, see what they think of it. And I think like tools like Slack or whatever, right, give you the ability to communicate across different teams much easier, and you should definitely make use of that because otherwise, you run the risk of like pissing off your developers, which you definitely do not want to do because a ruined relationship between developers and security team is very hard to repair.
It
Um,
is.
yeah.
I feel too like so I started writing software in like I don't know like 94 or something ridiculous. And I started like coding like as a teenager with my like family and stuff.
Mhm.
And back then like you couldn't first of all Google didn't exist, but like the search engines were garbage. But even like once we got like search engines that were garbage, there still just wasn't content on this topic. And so sometimes like I'll work with companies and I'm trying to explain how to do a thing and the tool says do this, and the developer's just like I don't know what you want me to do still. Do you know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
does it make sense for the security person to try to find like better content or better uh or make content sometimes, like if they have to, because it's specific like for your org?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's like yeah, I think that's like very helpful, especially creating content if you have the capacity for it. Um because like generally the ratio, just like the like number ratio, right, of like the amount of security engineers to the amount of developers is like tiny. It's incredibly small, right? Like I know some are like 1 to 100 developers or like 1 to 1000 developers, and at that point like you have to scale your information output, right? You cannot just tell every single person or just tell every single team, especially in like bigger orgs where there's like more like abstraction or like walls between different teams, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, having a kind of knowledge base, central knowledge base that you can point people to, um, where you create the content that your org needs, would be very very helpful too. Yeah, yeah, just
Yeah.
like because security is such like a um it's like a very difficult subject, right? And like now there's of course a lot of information on it online, but that's not something that people are really taught in schools, right? Um, in schools, people just like mainly just like go to learn like development and not really like security. Or if they do cover security, it's like not very much unless if you kind of specialize in that, at which point you're probably not on that side of the problem anymore. But having a way to kind of distill that information fast and easy, without your manual intervention, and like whenever the developer wants to access the information they can, that's incredibly important.
So let's say someone wants to get started and they want to learn how to write SAST tool or SAST rules. Would it make Would it make sense that they like brush up on regular expressions? Or is there like a standardization across like stack analysis tools and rating rules? Because I don't know.
I feel like the SaaS industry in general is just very like competitive, very cutthroat, and like it's kind of pitching novel ideas against novel ideas, and so therefore there, um,
It's
I feel like there
proprietary.
isn't much like friendly like information transfer between different companies, right?
Okay.
Or like SaaS vendors, right? Yeah, so I don't think there are really standards because of that. Yeah, I think generally like uh SemGraph at least, and I know like many older SaaS tools are very regex based. SemGraph is not regex based, but you can restrict findings using regex very easily, and that has like a very good effect. Like it just works really well, and it's like yeah, very easy to do.
So would you say that then, so it's not like there's one language that they can learn that would then apply to all stack analysis tools.
Mhm.
They need to kind of pick a stack analysis tool and then learn its rule writing language, assuming it has one, because a lot of them have nothing. They're just like, take these results or leave
Yeah.
them. We don't care. There's no customization. This is what you get.
Yeah, I think there's like a set of broader concepts that are probably applicable across every SaaS tool that lets you write custom rules, especially like SaaS for security tools, right? Like taint tracking is so important, um, right? Which
Can you
kind of
explain?
yeah. So in like program analysis, like basically data flow analysis or like taint analysis, taint tracking, whatever, it is like uh, you can track the flow of information uh, from one place, usually a like dangerous function call, like I don't know, uh, the input function in Python, which just lets you read input directly from the user and put it into a variable. You can track how that data flows through the program. And so basically, if the user's input is assigned to, I don't know, a variable, we call it A, right? And then
Mhm.
if A is added to like two other strings, B and C, then B and C are also tainted, right? And so it's not tracking the variable flow, but rather the data that the variable contains,
Okay.
and how that affects other variables. And uh, eventually, for especially for SAS purposes, it's like you want to track data as it flows from a source to a sink. So if you have a user input source, then a dangerous sink would be like a SQL, I don't know, SQL function call, or like exec call for like command injection, right? Or like I don't know, HTTP like response for like XSS or whatever, right? Oh,
So
sorry.
like, so we got some input and that data is tainted,
Hmm.
and then we use it somewhere else. If we validate it with our or somehow sanitize that information in between, is the SAS tool like, okay, you're cool, buddy, or is the SAS tool like, I still think you're in trouble, or like, how does that work? How does it go
um,
to report it or not report it?
Generally, if you pass it through a sanitizer that the SAS tool knows about, then yeah, you're then it's probably good to go. Like it will not flag. For SemGrep, right, sanitizers are just like patterns, and so usually for the rules that we write, they're just like function calls, right? Because most sanitizers are function calls, right? Where it's like you call sanitize HTML or something, and then it's
Mhm.
no longer like a possible XSS payload, right? Um,
Yes.
and yeah, so if you tell your SAS tool by putting it in your rule, like, hey, treat sanitize HTML as a sanitizer for this given rule, then it's not going to flag. I'm kind of explain that in like a nuanced way, because I guess like different sanitizers could have different subtle behaviors that, depending on how deep you want to go with your rule writing, you could encode all those different behaviors and say like, oh, if you use the sanitizer in this one bad way, then it's not going to sanitize properly, and then it would still produce a finding. But generally, that takes a lot longer than is actually worth.
But so if it doesn't see you call any sort of sanitizing validation function of any sort, and then you go and you use it, so you sync it by using one of these functions that might execute it, like
Mhm.
exec or like calling out to a database server to run your thing, then it's like, this is a problem, this is bad. I need to tell you, please don't do this.
Yeah,
Okay, okay,
yeah,
this is good.
yeah, and so I brought up like taint tracking specifically because, like, first of all, it is very useful, but also it makes rule writing a lot easier, where it's like for SemGraph at least, and probably for other tools, you just have to write the source and the sink, and then it'll do the in between data flow analysis for you. You don't have to like
Nice.
care about how that can happen, right? Whereas if you're just trying to recreate that, like using like a fake taint thing, just trying to encode all the different ways that information can be transferred between variables from a source to a sink, you're going to
Mhm.
have a huge rule that considers every case, and will probably be missing many still.
Okay, cool. This has been very informative. I have learned a lot of new stuff. Thank you, Enno.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are like way past when I was supposed to wrap this up.
Oh, okay.
So that's okay. We all have our skills, and saying goodbye is not one of mine.
Hmm.
But where can people like follow you or get more Enno? Like if they want to see if you're somewhere else, like where could they learn more?
Oh, yeah. I have a Twitter, encoded with two N's, so ENNCODED. And I also have a YouTube channel under that same name where I post like SemGraph rule writing. Uh, I want to say videos, but currently there's only one. But I have like others that I just need to hit public on, to be honest. Yeah. So I currently just have one video, but I'm definitely planning to have more. And so those are kind of going through like I want to kind of go through the like rule writing process itself and kind of show the like nitty gritty, like go into all the details and like all the considerations and stuff, because that's not readily available online, and that's hard to make available online too.
Yeah.
Just like someone's thought process, right? Um, yeah. So um, people seem to like my first video a lot. Maybe you would too. So
Awesome. That sounds great. So if you're listening or you're watching, this is going to be in the show notes so that you can go and watch the video. You can get the YouTube channel. You can get the Twitter handle. Is there also a LinkedIn as well?
Yeah, I believe it's just Enno dash Liu. Um,
Okay.
yeah, Enno dash Liu. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I will
So you
put
can add
that
me
in
there,
the
I guess, if you want.
Awesome. So I'm going to put that in the show notes too. And you can always just follow Enno. You don't have to connect if you're like, I'm shy. I don't know if I want to talk yet. I just want to see all the cool things you're releasing. You can also just follow people on LinkedIn and be a little more shy, but still see what they're working on and what they're releasing. So sometimes I do, well, I'm not allowed more connections, but sometimes like I do that where I just like follow a lot of people where I'm like, I just
Oh
want to
yeah.
see what you're up to.
Mhm.
And that's helpful too. Well, Enno, thank you very much for teaching me new stuff about stack analysis. I have found this very interesting, and this is our third episode on stack analysis, and this is definitely more of a deep dive into how it works. And I think that
Awesome.
for people like who are just like, I feed my code into this magic box and then things come out, it's nice to know what actually occurs,
Hmm.
and that they can have some sort of power over it as well by like writing rules and kind of taking matters into your own hands, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Awesome. And I want to take this moment to thank our sponsor again, because I was supposed to thank them in the middle, but I was kind of wrapped up in you. And so I want to say thank you to Day of Security. So this annual event advocates for the inclusion and diversification of gender in cybersecurity, and it is very, very soon. Day one, May 18th, is virtual, so you can attend from anywhere in the world. And day two, May 19th, is in person in Redwood City, which is in, for those of you that don't live in California, it's in California, sort of near the Bay Area, San Francisco-y, sort of like I live in Canada. All of it is far from me. But tickets are free and it's going to be on the Hopin platform. There's going to be tons and tons of speakers. I have sponsored this podcast for, or I have sponsored this conference for many years in a row, and they do a lot of good stuff. So you can see the agenda and more by going to dayofsecurity.com. And security, imagine the word security, but then just put an H. So it's SHECURITY. So dayofsecurity.com. And just go check it out. They also have a YouTube channel, which, as you might have imagined, is youtube.com/dayofsecurity, all one word squished together. I also want to tell you that there is a sale on open source intelligence courses built by Joe Gray on the We Hack Purple Academy right now. So academy.wehackpurple.com. All of Joe's courses are 30% off, so please go check them out if you want to know how to basically look up everything and anything about someone for a reason, ideally for finding them or researching social engineering projects, etc. A lot of detectives and law enforcement use this skill. This is something that you could brush up on. And with that, Enno, thank you for being on the We Hack Purple
Of
podcast.
course, yeah. This was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Awesome. And everyone, I think you should go check out the one video so we can encourage Enno to make more videos. Give some thumbs up.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we'll see you next time, Enno. Thank you so
Mhm.
much again.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you.